I painted this demonstration from life in front of my portrait class. The objective was to create, in 1 hour, a portrait using only 3 pigments: transparent earth red, burnt umber, and titanium white. In other words, the value path I'm about to show you. The hues are not perfect, but they are reasonable. Hi, and welcome to Drawing and Painting for Everyone. This tutorial describes the arrangement of my palette and the pigments that I use when I create a portrait. So let's get started. To build my palette, I'm going to start with these 3 pigments from Gamblin: titanium white, transparent earth red, and burnt umber. If you work with Winsor & Newton, you can use their burnt sienna, but most burnt siennas out there are too blue for my liking. If you have a specific brand that you like to work with, look through their pigments for a color that has the same hue as burnt sienna, but is built from pigment red 101 rather than the pigment brown 7. If you need a review of the generic pigment index numbers, I'll put a tab here so that you can come up to speed on that information. Okay, for this first value, I'm going to mix equal parts transparent earth red and titanium white. I refer to this first value as my 50% mixture. For my second value, I'll pull about half of this 50% mixture and add an equal amount of titanium white. I'll do the exact same thing for each of these light values. Whatever amount I take, I'll add that much titanium white. When I paint a portrait, I strive to establish the values before adjusting the hue. I almost never use these values without a slight color change. Again, I'll try to pull about half of this pile and add an equal amount of titanium white. You may have seen painters add white to a color before, but generally they create a continuous gradient rather than a step gradient. I prefer these small steps, and I'll show you why after my value path is created. That's a little too much. Building these steps isn't an exact science, but you'll be surprised at how close these values are the next time you create them. Okay, that does it for my light values. Now I'll add a little burnt umber up here. My first dark is slightly different than all the rest of my mixtures. I'll take my 50% mixture, add an equal amount of this transparent earth red, and then also add an equal amount of this burnt umber. So now I have 1 to 1 to 1 rather than 1 to 1, if that makes sense. For my next dark step, I'll just take an amount of this dark and add burnt umber. So I'm making each of these steps gradually darker. My final dark is simply a pile of straight burnt umber. So there you have it. That's my value path. Now I'm going to take a sheet of watercolor paper and paint each of the steps and label each of the steps. I also label my palette so that I can keep track of things. Okay, I've taken a quick second and rearranged this palette so that it looks like how I like to have it when I start my paintings. This is my value path. I have my palette set up like this every time I paint a portrait. Whether the complexion's dark or light, it's irrelevant. I'm going to set it up this way. Down the right side, you'll see all my pigments that I use to adjust my hue. I'll list those in the video description below. This is how I like to have my palette set up before I get started. I mentioned in there that I like a step gradient rather than a continuous gradient as I mix out my values. I like building this card. I like having these values on this card so that I can lay it on my reference and tell which value to pick from. It also helps me with hue. I can lay this on my reference and see if I need a little more red or a little more green or a little more blue in my color. I sure hope this has been helpful. Thanks. If you find this video valuable, there are many ways to support it. You can subscribe, you can give it the thumbs up, you can share it on social media, or you can support it directly through Patreon. A link to my Patreon account is provided on the video information page below. Thank you, and good luck with your work.